The polished marble floors of Lord Fitzsimons' London townhouse gleamed in the late afternoon sun, reflecting Emma Fairchild's pale face as she stared at the letter in her trembling hands. The parchment was fine, the seal bearing the crest of the Earl of Blackmore, a reminder of the bargain that would save her family from ruin but condemn her to a marriage without love. "You've read it 3 times now, Jane," her younger sister Amelia said softly. "Does Lord Blackmore's proposal change with each reading?" Jane Fairchild carefully folded the letter and placed it on the writing desk. At 23, she had long resigned herself to spinsterhood after the scandal that had destroyed her prospects 3 seasons ago. Now, fate had delivered an unexpected reprieve, though perhaps reprieve was too kind a word for marrying a man nearly 40 years her senior. "The Earl's terms remain the same," Jane replied, forcing a smile. "He will settle father's debts and provide dowries for you and Lucy. In exchange, I am to become the next Countess of Blackmore." Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "But you've never even met him." "They say he's cruel and that his first 2 wives died under mysterious circumstances." "Surely father wouldn't sell you to such a man." "Father has no choice," Jane replied, her voice steady though her heart raced with fear. "Lord Blackmore's offer is our only salvation. Without it, we face debtor's prison and complete social ruin." Jane had long believed that happiness was a luxury afforded only to those with wealth and status, neither of which the Fairchilds possessed any more. Not since her father's investments had collapsed, leaving them with nothing but mounting debts and a name that once commanded respect. The scandal sheets had been relentless in their gleeful documentation of the Fairchilds' fall from grace. "What of love, Jane?" Amelia asked, her innocent eyes shining with the naive dreams of youth. "Love is for poets and fortunate débutantes," Jane replied, running her fingers over the wax seal. "For women like me, security must suffice." Ever since her own disgrace 3 seasons ago, when she had been discovered in what appeared to be a compromising position with Philip Cunningham, the man she had foolishly loved, Jane had accepted that her life would follow a different path than the one she had once dreamed of. The whispers still followed her through ballrooms on the rare occasions she attended social functions. The false belief that had taken root that night, that she was unworthy of true happiness, had shaped every decision since. "The Earl arrives in a fortnight to formalize our engagement," Jane continued. "We shall be married by Christmas." "So soon?" Amelia gasped. Jane nodded, turning to the window that overlooked the garden. The Earl of Blackmore was known for his strict adherence to tradition, his vast estates in Cornwall, and his need for a male heir, something his previous wives had failed to provide. At 62, he was desperate enough to overlook Jane's tarnished reputation. "Perhaps you will grow to love him," Amelia offered weakly. Jane smiled sadly. "I expect nothing from marriage but the satisfaction of knowing you, Lucy, and father will be secure." 2 weeks passed with agonizing slowness. Jane spent the time preparing herself for the life that awaited her. She pored over books about Cornwall, memorized the lineage of the Blackmore Earls, and practiced the proper way to address her future husband. Each night, she reminded herself that this sacrifice was noble, necessary, and the only path available to her. The morning of the Earl's arrival dawned cold and grey. Jane dressed with particular care in her best gown, a simple blue silk that had been recut from one of her mother's old dresses. Her hands shook as her lady's maid arranged her dark hair in a simple but elegant style. "You look beautiful, Miss Fairchild," the maid said softly. "Beauty matters little in such arrangements," Jane replied, pinning a small cameo at her throat, her last remaining piece of jewelry. The sounds of carriage wheels on gravel drew her to the window. A magnificent black coach emblazoned with the Blackmore crest pulled into the drive, drawn by 4 matching grey horses. Jane's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched a tall figure descend from the carriage. Even from her vantage point, she could tell this was not the stooped, elderly man described in the society pages. This man moved with the easy grace of someone in his prime, his broad shoulders filling out his impeccably tailored coat. Jane frowned, wondering if the Earl had sent a representative in his place, perhaps a solicitor, to review the marriage contract. "Jane," her father called from below. "Come down at once." With a steadying breath, Jane descended the stairs, her practiced smile firmly in place. As she entered the drawing room, she kept her eyes modestly lowered as dictated by propriety. "My dear, allow me to present Lord Preston Bradshaw, the Earl of Blackmore," her father said, his voice carrying the unnatural joviality of a man drowning in relief. Jane curtsied deeply, confusion blooming in her mind. When she finally raised her eyes, she found herself looking not at an elderly gentleman, but at a man who could not be more than 35. His eyes were a startling shade of green, his dark hair showing only the faintest touches of silver at the temples. The strong line of his jaw bore a small scar that somehow only enhanced his handsome features. "Miss Fairchild," the Earl said, his deep voice carrying a hint of amusement as he bowed. "I see my uncle's reputation precedes me." "Your uncle, my lord?" Jane managed, her mind struggling to make sense of the scene. "The late Earl," Lord Bradshaw clarified. "My uncle passed away 3 months ago. I inherited the title, as well as, it seems, his correspondence." His eyes, keen and intelligent, studied her face. "Including, apparently, a marriage negotiation I knew nothing about until his solicitor presented me with the letters." Jane felt the blood drain from her face. She looked to her father, who appeared equally stunned. We had no knowledge of the former Earl's passing," Mr. Fairchild stammered. "The London papers made no mention. My uncle lived as a recluse these past 10 years, the Earl explained. His death was not widely reported outside of Cornwall." His gaze returned to Jane, softening slightly. "I apologize for any confusion this has caused." Jane felt as though the floor beneath her feet had suddenly disappeared. The bargain she had resigned herself to, the future she had prepared for, was now uncertain. "Then I presume the arrangement is void," she said quietly, relief and new anxiety warring within her. The Earl's expression became unreadable. "That, Miss Fairchild, is what I've come to discuss." The meeting that followed was conducted with painful formality. The new Earl explained that while he had not initiated the arrangement, he felt obligated to honor his uncle's commitments, or at least to address them properly. "The financial aspects of the agreement can still be met," Lord Bradshaw said, his tone businesslike. "Your father's debts can be settled. However, the marriage portion requires further consideration." Jane sat rigidly in her chair, acutely aware of the scrutiny in the Earl's gaze. She wondered what he saw, a desperate young woman willing to sell herself to save her family? A disgraced spinster grasping at her last chance for security? "I propose a compromise," Lord Bradshaw continued. "I shall honor the financial arrangements immediately, relieving your family's most pressing concerns. As for the marriage—" He paused, his eyes meeting Jane's directly. "I suggest a period of acquaintance before making such a permanent decision." "Acquaintance?" Jane echoed. "Yes. I shall remain in London for 2 months. During that time, we might determine if we suit. If, at the end of that period, either of us wishes to withdraw, the financial arrangements will remain intact, but the marriage contract will be dissolved with no ill feeling." The offer was unexpected, generous, and entirely bewildering to Jane. Why would this man, young, titled, undoubtedly wealthy, consider marrying her when he could have his pick of untarnished débutantes? "That is most generous, my lord," her father said eagerly. "We accept your terms without reservation." "Actually," the Earl said, his gaze still fixed on Jane. "I would prefer to hear Miss Fairchild's thoughts on the matter." The room fell silent. No one had asked for Jane's opinion since the day her father had first presented Lord Blackmore's letter. The weight of choice, a luxury she thought long forsaken, settled uncomfortably on her shoulders. She began, uncertain how to proceed. "I would be grateful for the opportunity to become better acquainted before making such a commitment." Something like approval flashed in the Earl's eyes. "Then it is settled." He rose, signaling the end of the meeting. "Miss Fairchild, might I call upon you tomorrow afternoon? Perhaps we could walk in the park, if the weather permits." Jane nodded, finding herself momentarily unable to speak. This was not at all how she had expected the day to unfold. As the Earl took his leave, Jane caught a glimpse of something in his expression, a curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper that she could not name. Whatever bargain her father had struck with the old Earl had transformed into something entirely different, and Jane found herself adrift in unfamiliar waters. That night, sleep eluded her. The face of the new Earl of Blackmore, so different from the wizened visage she had imagined, kept appearing in her mind. Preston Bradshaw had upended her expectations in every possible way. She had prepared herself to be a nurse and companion to an elderly man. Instead, she faced the prospect of becoming the wife of someone vital and intimidatingly perceptive. The following afternoon, true to his word, Lord Bradshaw arrived promptly at 3. The weather had indeed improved, allowing for the promised walk. Jane's father insisted on Amelia accompanying them as a chaperone, though he was clearly delighted by this unexpected turn of events. As they strolled through the park, Jane was acutely aware of the curious glances they attracted. The Earl of Blackmore walking with the disgraced Jane Fairchild was gossip too delicious for society to ignore. "I sense you are uncomfortable, Miss Fairchild," the Earl said quietly, offering his arm as they navigated a narrow path. Amelia had fallen a few paces behind, giving them a semblance of privacy. "Forgive me, my lord. I am unaccustomed to such attention." His brow furrowed. "Surely a lady as lovely as yourself is accustomed to admiration." Jane couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped her. "You are too kind, my lord, but we both know that is not the reason for the stares. Your association with me will only invite speculation and whispers. I would not wish that upon you." Lord Bradshaw stopped, turning to face her fully. "You refer to the incident 3 years ago with Mr. Cunningham." Jane stiffened, mortification flooding her cheeks with heat. "You know of it." "I made inquiries after receiving my uncle's papers," he admitted. "Society has a long memory for scandal but a short one for facts." "The facts matter little now," Jane replied. "My reputation was irreparably damaged that night. Because you were discovered alone with a man in Lord and Lady Harrington's library during their annual ball. Because I was foolish enough to believe Philip Cunningham's promises of love and devotion," Jane corrected, surprising herself with her candor. "Because I agreed to meet him privately, thinking he intended to propose. Instead, she stopped abruptly, unable to continue. The Earl's expression darkened. "Instead, he arranged for you to be discovered in a compromising position, ensuring your disgrace without having to follow through on his supposed intentions." Jane looked away, the humiliation of that night still fresh despite the passing years. "You are remarkably well informed, my lord." "I make it my business to know the truth, Miss Fairchild." Mr. Cunningham's subsequent hasty marriage to Miss Helena Rutherford and her substantial dowry speaks volumes about his character. They resumed walking, silence stretching between them. Amelia had spotted a friend and, with Jane's nodded permission, had gone to exchange brief greetings, still within sight but out of earshot. "May I speak plainly, Miss Fairchild?" the Earl asked suddenly. "I would prefer it, my lord." I am not my uncle. I did not seek this arrangement, nor do I view marriage as a mere transaction. However, I find myself intrigued by you." His green eyes held hers steadily. A woman willing to sacrifice her future for her family's security shows remarkable character. "I would like to know you better." Jane felt something shift within her, a small fracture in the wall she had built around her heart. "I fear you would be disappointed, my lord. I am not the innocent young lady most gentlemen seek in a bride." "Most gentlemen are fools," he replied simply. "And I stopped seeking innocence long ago. Experience and strength of character interest me far more." Before Jane could respond, Amelia rejoined them, her eyes wide with excitement. "Jane! Lady Pembroke has invited us to her musical evening tomorrow. It seems our fortunes are already changing." Jane doubted the invitation had anything to do with their fortunes and everything to do with curiosity about her connection to the Earl, but she said nothing to dampen Amelia's enthusiasm. "A musical evening would be delightful," Lord Bradshaw said. "Perhaps I might escort you and your sisters, if your father permits." The days that followed brought a whirlwind of changes to Jane's life. True to his word, Lord Bradshaw settled her father's debts immediately, restoring the family to financial security if not prosperity. Invitations that had dried up years ago suddenly flooded in, as society's doors reopened, not for the Fairchilds, Jane knew, but for the Earl of Blackmore. Each day, Lord Bradshaw called upon her. Their conversations ranged from literature to politics, from music to philosophy. Jane found herself gradually relaxing in his company, though she maintained a careful guard around her heart. At Lady Pembroke's musical evening, Jane noticed Philip Cunningham among the guests. He watched her with undisguised shock as she entered on Lord Bradshaw's arm, her simple but elegant gown, newly commissioned at the Earl's insistence, drawing admiring glances. "Are you well?" Lord Bradshaw asked quietly, noting her sudden tension. "Quite well," Jane replied, forcing herself to meet Philip's gaze steadily before turning away. "The past holds no power over me tonight." But later, when she found herself momentarily alone in the conservatory, seeking a brief respite from the crowd, Philip approached. "Jane," he said, his handsome face arranged in an expression of contrition that might once have weakened her resolve. "What an unexpected pleasure to see you in society again." "Mr. Cunningham," she acknowledged coolly. "I see you've caught yourself an Earl," he continued, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Quite an achievement for a woman in your position." Jane felt a familiar pain at his words, but something new accompanied it, anger rather than shame. "As opposed to a man in your position? Tell me, how is married life with Helena's fortune?" His expression hardened. "You've grown sharp-tongued in your exile." "And you remain exactly as you were," Jane replied. "If you'll excuse me, I should return to Lord Bradshaw." Philip caught her wrist as she moved to pass him. "Does he know about us? About what you were willing to do that night?" "Release me, sir," Jane said firmly. "I would hate for your Earl to discover his getting damaged goods," Philip continued, his grip tightening. "I believe the lady asked you to release her," came Lord Bradshaw's voice from the conservatory entrance. His tone was perfectly even, but Jane saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Philip dropped her wrist immediately. "Lord Blackmore, I was just reminiscing with an old acquaintance." "So I gathered," the Earl replied coldly. "Miss Fairchild, your sister is looking for you." Jane moved to his side gratefully, her heart pounding. As they walked away, she whispered, "Thank you. No thanks are necessary." His voice remained tight with controlled anger. "Though I confess, I'm now tempted to call that man out." "Please don't," Jane said quickly. "He isn't worth the scandal it would cause." Lord Bradshaw studied her face. "You're right, of course. But I dislike seeing him distress you." "He cannot distress me any more," Jane said, realizing as she spoke that it was becoming true. "What happened belongs to the past." The Earl's expression softened. "Then let us focus on the present." He offered his arm once more, leading her back to the music room where a soprano was preparing to perform. As the weeks passed, Jane found herself increasingly drawn to Preston Bradshaw. He was unlike any man she had ever known, thoughtful, principled, and possessed of a quiet strength that never needed to announce itself. He treated her with a respect that gradually began to heal wounds she hadn't realized were still open. One afternoon, as they walked through the British Museum, Lord Bradshaw shared stories of his travels abroad, adventures that had kept him away from England during the years of his uncle's decline. "Is that why you weren't next in line for the title?" Jane asked. "I confess, I know little of your family's structure." "My father was the younger brother," Preston explained. "He died when I was 20. I spent the next decade building my own fortune through trade in India and the Americas, much to my uncle's disapproval. He considered commerce beneath our family's dignity. Yet you persisted." "I wanted independence," he said simply. "To make my own way rather than rely on inheritance. When word reached me of my uncle's failing health, I returned to England, but it was too late for any reconciliation. He died bitter and alone. Hence the search for a wife to continue the line," Jane observed. Preston's expression grew thoughtful. "My uncle saw marriage as a means to an end, the continuation of the Blackmore name. I've always hoped for something more." "Love?" Jane asked, unable to keep a hint of skepticism from her voice. "Partnership," he corrected. "Mutual respect. Companionship." He paused, his gaze holding hers. "Though I wouldn't dismiss the possibility of love." Jane looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Such things are rare in marriages of our class." "Perhaps because too many marry for the wrong reasons," Preston replied. "Wealth. Status. Convenience. You make it sound simple." "It isn't simple at all," he admitted. "But neither is it impossible." That evening, after returning home, Jane found herself unable to sleep, Preston's words echoing in her mind. The 2-month period he had proposed was nearing its end. Soon, a decision would have to be made: continue with the marriage as planned or part ways, the financial arrangements intact but the personal connection severed. The thought of never seeing him again caused a physical ache in her chest that she could no longer ignore. The following week brought the Duchess of Hartington's annual spring ball, the most coveted invitation of the season. Jane attended with her family and Lord Bradshaw, who had secured their invitations. The ballroom blazed with hundreds of candles, illuminating the cream of society in their finest attire. As Jane waltzed with Preston, she was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Despite the Earl's attentions and her family's restored finances, her past remained a subject of speculation. "You're thinking too loudly," Preston murmured as he guided her through a turn. "Am I?" Jane replied, forcing a smile. "Your thoughts are practically echoing off the chandeliers." His green eyes searched hers. "What troubles you?" "Nothing of consequence." Preston's expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he didn't press further. When the dance ended, he escorted her to where her father and sisters stood. "If you'll excuse me," he said, "I must speak with Lord Hartington briefly about a matter of business." As he walked away, Jane overheard a conversation from 2 women standing nearby, their voices pitched low but still audible. "I can't imagine what the Earl of Blackmore sees in her," one said. "After that scandal with Philip Cunningham, she's hardly suitable Countess material." Perhaps she possesses talents we're unaware of, the other replied with a malicious laugh. Men can be persuaded to overlook a great deal for certain comforts. Jane felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Though she had endured similar comments for years, somehow they cut deeper now, tarnishing the happiness she had begun to feel in Preston's company. "Ignore them," Amelia whispered, squeezing her hand. "They're just jealous." But the damage was done. The doubt that Jane had managed to push aside came rushing back. What could a man like Preston Bradshaw truly want with her? Perhaps he was simply honoring his uncle's agreement in the most palatable way possible. Perhaps, once they were married, he would regret his choice, would come to see her as others did. By the time Preston returned, Jane had composed herself outwardly, but inside, her thoughts swirled with renewed insecurity. He must have sensed the change, for his brow furrowed with concern. "Would you care to step onto the terrace for some air?" he asked. "You look pale." Jane nodded, allowing him to guide her through the French doors onto the wide terrace overlooking the gardens. The night air was cool but not unpleasant, scented with early roses and lilac. "Now," Preston said when they had found a relatively private corner, "will you tell me what's happened in my absence to disturb you so?" Jane hesitated. "It's nothing I haven't heard before." "Then it is something you should not have had to hear again," he replied, his voice hardening. "What was said?" "The usual speculation about my character and your reasons for associating with me." Jane forced a smile. "Society cannot fathom why the Earl of Blackmore would court a woman with my history." Preston's jaw tightened. "Society knows nothing of your character or my reasons." "Don't they?" Jane asked softly. "My lord, Preston, I must ask you something, and I beg your honest answer." "Always." "Why are you pursuing this marriage? You could have any woman in England. Younger women. Wealthier women. Women without my complications." Preston was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant gardens. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. "When I first came to London to address my uncle's arrangement, I expected to meet a desperate family and a young woman who had agreed to a loveless match out of necessity. I intended to honor the financial aspects but gently extricate myself from the marriage portion." He turned to face her fully. "Then I met you." "And found exactly what you expected," Jane said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "No," he contradicted firmly. "I found a woman of remarkable dignity and strength. Someone who had faced society's cruelty and emerged not broken, but tempered. I saw how you protected your sisters, how you carried yourself with grace despite the whispers." His eyes held hers intently. "I saw a woman I wanted to know better." Jane felt something inside her tremble at his words. "You pitied me." "I admired you," he corrected. "There is a vast difference." "Even knowing my past?" "The scandal that made me unmarriageable to most men of your station." Preston's expression hardened. "That scandal revealed more about Philip Cunningham's character than yours. You trusted unwisely, yes, but your only crime was believing in love." He took her hand gently. "Jane, I don't care what society says about you. I care about the woman I've come to know these past weeks." The sincerity in his voice made her heart race. "And when you tire of defending your choice to your peers? When you realize that my reputation will always cast a shadow on yours? Is that what you think of me?" he asked quietly. "That I am so weak as to be swayed by drawing-room gossip?" "No," Jane admitted. "But I fear you don't understand what you're taking on." "I understand perfectly." His voice was steady, certain. "The question is not whether I know what I'm doing, but whether you want this marriage at all." The directness of his question caught Jane off guard. In all her worrying about his motives and the judgment of society, she had avoided examining her own feelings too closely. She began, then stopped, unable to articulate the confusion in her heart. Preston's expression softened. Perhaps that is answer enough. Before Jane could respond, the terrace doors opened, and other guests spilled out, their laughter shattering the moment. Preston offered his arm to lead her back inside, his face now an unreadable mask. For the remainder of the evening, a new tension existed between them. Jane found herself watching him across the ballroom, noticing for the first time the subtle changes in his demeanor. There was a stiffness to his shoulders that hadn't been there before, a distance in his eyes when they spoke. By the time the Fairchild's carriage arrived to take them home, Jane felt as though something precious was slipping through her fingers, something she hadn't fully recognized until this moment. "Lord Bradshaw," she said as he helped her into the carriage, "might I call upon you tomorrow? There are matters we should discuss." "Of course," he replied formally. "Shall we say 2 o'clock?" Jane nodded, her throat tight with unspoken words. That night, she barely slept, her mind replaying every conversation, every glance, every moment she had spent with Preston Bradshaw. By morning, she had reached a decision that terrified her with its clarity. When she arrived at his townhouse the following afternoon, Jane was shown into a tastefully appointed drawing room. Preston stood as she entered, his expression guarded. "Miss Fairchild," he said, bowing. "You wish to speak with me?" "Yes." Jane took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "My Lord Preston, I owe you an apology." His brow furrowed in confusion. "For what, precisely?" "For questioning your motives. For assuming the worst when you have shown me nothing but kindness and respect." She clasped her hands together to still their trembling. "I have allowed my past to color my perception of the present, and of you." Preston's expression softened slightly. "You've had good reason to be cautious." "Perhaps," Jane acknowledged. "But in protecting myself from potential pain, I've been blind to something remarkable happening right before me." "And what is that?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Jane met his gaze directly. "I've been so focused on what others think, on my reputation and your reasons for considering this match, that I failed to recognize my own feelings." She took a steadying breath. "The truth is, I care for you, Preston. Deeply. More than I believed possible." The admission hung in the air between them. Preston remained silent, his expression unreadable. "I understand if your feelings have changed," Jane continued, her voice wavering slightly. "If last night made you reconsider the wisdom of this arrangement." "I would not hold you to, Jane," Preston interrupted, crossing the room to stand before her. "My feelings have not changed. If anything, they have only grown stronger." Hope fluttered in Jane's chest. "Then you still wish to proceed with the marriage?" Preston took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I wish for more than that. I don't want a marriage of convenience or a fulfillment of my uncle's arrangement. I want a true partnership with a woman I admire and care for." His eyes held hers intently. "I want you, Jane, not out of obligation, but because these past weeks have shown me the kind of woman you are." Jane felt tears welling in her eyes. "Even with all the complications my past brings." "Your past is part of you," Preston said softly. "It has shaped you into the woman standing before me now, strong, compassionate, and far braver than you give yourself credit for." He smiled, a tenderness in his expression that made Jane's heart ache. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened, only to consider the possibility that it doesn't define your future." The word struck Jane with unexpected force. For years, she had believed that one mistake had determined the course of her life, that happiness and love were luxuries forever beyond her reach. Now, looking into Preston's eyes, she glimpsed a different truth. "I think," she said slowly, "I would like to try." Preston's smile deepened. "As would I." In that moment, the distance between them seemed to vanish. Preston reached up to brush a tear from her cheek, his touch feather-light. "May I kiss you, Jane Fairchild?" Jane nodded, her heart pounding as Preston leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. When they parted, she felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, as though a weight she had carried for years had finally begun to lift. The weeks that followed transformed Jane's life in ways she could never have imagined. The formal announcement of her engagement to the Earl of Blackmar sent ripples through London society. Some whispered, of course, old scandals were revisited, speculation about the match ran rampant, but Jane found herself increasingly unbothered by the gossip. Preston stood beside her through it all, his unwavering support giving her a confidence she had forgotten she possessed. At balls and dinner parties, he proudly introduced her as his future countess, his hand warm at the small of her back, his gaze conveying his feelings without words. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden at the Fairchild home, Preston mentioned his estate in Cornwall. "Blackmar Hall needs a mistress's touch," he said. "My uncle let much of it fall into disrepair during his later years." "Is it very grand?" Jane asked, trying to imagine the ancestral home she would soon preside over. Preston laughed. "Parts of it date back to the Tudor era, so it's more imposing than grand. But the setting is spectacular, perched on the cliffs overlooking the sea." He squeezed her hand. "I think you'll find it suits you." "What makes you say that?" "It has character," he replied simply. "Strength. Beauty that doesn't announce itself but reveals itself to those who take the time to look deeper." His eyes met hers. "Like you." Jane felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "You have a gift for saying exactly the right thing, my lord." "Only when I speak the truth." He paused, his expression growing serious. "Jane, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." "Something important?" "Yes?" "The arrangement my uncle made with your father, it was never what brought us together. You know that, don't you?" Jane nodded slowly. "I believe I do." "Good." Preston took both her hands in his. "Because I want there to be no doubt in your mind about why I'm marrying you. Not out of obligation, not to honor an old man's bargain, but because I have fallen completely in love with you." The words, so direct, so unambiguous, stole Jane's breath. For a moment, she could only stare at him, searching his face for any sign of uncertainty and finding none. "You love me," she whispered. "With all my heart," he confirmed. "I think I began falling for you that first day, when you looked at me with such honest trepidation, prepared to sacrifice your happiness for your family's security. Every day since has only deepened my feelings." Jane felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I never thought to hear those words again, never thought I could trust them if I did." "Trust is earned," Preston said softly. "I hope I've begun to earn yours." "You have," Jane assured him, her voice thick with emotion. "More than you know." "Then will you make me the happiest of men and marry me not because of an arrangement, but because you choose to? Because perhaps, someday, you might come to love me too." Jane's heart swelled with a joy so profound it was almost painful. The protective wall she had built around her heart over years of disappointment and shame finally crumbled completely. "Oh, Preston," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "I already do love you. How could I not? You've shown me that my past doesn't dictate my future, that I am worthy of happiness after all." The smile that illuminated Preston's face was like sunlight breaking through clouds. He drew her into his arms, holding her as though she were something infinitely precious. "My Jane," he murmured against her hair. "My brave, beautiful Jane." 3 months later, Jane Fairchild became the Countess of Blackmore in a simple ceremony attended by family and close friends. As she spoke her vows, Jane felt none of the resignation she had once expected would accompany her marriage, only joy, hope, and a profound sense of coming home. That evening, as their carriage carried them toward Cornwall and Blackmore Hall, Preston took her hand in his. "Are you happy, my love?" he asked. Jane looked at the man beside her, the man who had seen her not for her past mistakes but for her true self, and felt a contentment she had once believed impossible. "Completely," she answered, and knew it to be the truth. The girl who had believed herself unworthy of love had vanished, replaced by a woman who understood that the heart's capacity for healing was as boundless as its capacity for love. As the carriage rolled on toward their future, Jane rested her head against Preston's shoulder, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought not the aging Earl she had expected, but the man she now couldn't imagine living without.